Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Martin. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March Solutions Council meeting. It is good to see you. I am coming to you from Hood River. And looking forward to our conversation today and some presentations. Up on the screen is a quick overview of public comment. For those that are in the room or online that are wishing to make public comment, this is how you go about doing that. With that, we will go straight into introductions. Nicole, I think you wanted to make a couple staff introductions.
Yeah, if we could go maybe just to the agenda slide to have that up. You notice a new face in the room and still some newer faces you might be getting used to. Wanted to introduce you to some of our newest members of the Homeless Services Division. You met Tim Ellsworth last time. He's listening in, so he's hearing what you're saying, but he's not in the room here today. He is our new business operations manager. He started at the end of February and has been quickly coming up to speed and learning all things homeless services. He came from community corrections in the county, so lots of county, great county experience that we're able to take it to leverage here internally. And then to my left here, you'll notice Katie Gentry. And Katie, I might just ask you to introduce yourself and say hey.
Sure. I am the new Catherine, if that means anything to folks. Overseeing the program implementation branch. I'm actually from Oregon and really excited to be back in Oregon. I was born and raised here, but have spent the last 9 years in Arizona working in homeless services. And then before that was in Colorado. So really excited to be back in my hometown working on things I love. And I will somehow share out my contact information. Please reach out. Would love to grab coffee or get to know you and your programs better.
Great. All right. And then I want to just take a moment and also just say Katie has been here since March 3rd. That's your first day?
Yeah, March 3rd.
So
3 weeks in.
Quickly up to speed. She'll be presenting to you already. So that's the level of caliber we have on board. And I just want to remind you, we have 2 newer staff that are supporting Solutions Council. Chelsea Blair.
Hi.
Chelsea is filling in for Nadia while she's on leave. I'm happy to share out Nadia had a healthy baby girl. The family's happy and happy at home. She looks forward to seeing you all in May when she's back part-time. So we're really excited for her and really grateful for Chelsea for stepping in and supporting all of this work. And then I want to make sure you know Martin Manat. Martin is 3 months-ish in.
Well, it's like 7 weeks, like not even 2 months.
Feels like longer. I'm sure you've received many emails from Martin. Just want to make sure you know Mara stepped into a new role. She's still here supporting, slowly stepping away, but Martin will be your main administrative point in contact if you have issues with any materials, getting online, knowing where things are. We've got a team here to support you. So happy to have them. And you're able to stick around afterwards and say hey. Feel free to say hey and get to know our new folks.
Thank you. Perfect. I do need to go back to public comment and just ask if there's anyone in the room that came for public comment, or if Martin, you're seeing anyone online.
No comments online, but Rigoberto.
Yeah, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Rigoberto Lopez. I'm with Center for Parent. I'm the assistant director. So I don't know what hat to wear in this case, either public or service provider. But yeah, I just wanted to say hi. I applied, I think I mentioned I applied for this council. They never did it because I think my ChatGPT responses to the application did not. All cool, okay with that? Yeah, but at least you guys have this space, and I want to get involved with that and want to on with the overall system. I specialize in system optimization, so at the end of the day, you guys are making decisions that are going to impact our system, and I just want to be here to provide some support around that. So just want to say hi, introduce myself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We did have a submission come in online. Martin, did you want me to read that?
I'm happy to do it. I see Cameron raised his hand as well, or raised their hand as well.
Great. Let's go there.
If you wanted to, make a comment.
Cameron, are you perfect?
Hi,
I did submit public comment and did just want to make sure that that gets read. I'm assuming that is the one comment that got submitted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Great. Just wanted to make sure that it was included in the record. So I guess I'll just read it for myself. As a member of the Tri-County Planning Body, in our most recent meeting, Washington County noted that use of other reserves would be dependent on contracted service provider spending rates. As we enter Q4 of fiscal year 24 to 25, I think it would be beneficial to have some idea of what that spending looks like so far for fiscal year 24 25, and have that be shared out more broadly. I also think it would be helpful to make clear that the messaging to all service providers is to cut back the use of their flex funds service provider spending in order to potentially have some reserve from that allocation to help support the right sizing of the system going forward. And I just want to speak that in this current kind of top-down approach for communications, that county has to tell leaderships in agencies and then have that agency leadership relay the messages to their direct service staff. That I feel like this kind of communication method leaves a lot of room for messages to be not delivered accurately, and that we all want to work towards this sustainable program. And I think the only way to do that is with even more transparency with what is being asked of our service providers, our direct service staff, and how we can all contribute to making this work as long as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Appreciate it. Okay, any other public comment for the good of the order? Perfect. We did introductions and we're going to jump into the agenda, but first I am going to take a hot second to congratulate our council member Vernon Baker on the grand opening of his 60-bed shelter yesterday in Tigard. Fantastic work. Great representation of all levels of government coming together to make this possible for our homeless friends to have a safe, welcoming place to get basic needs met. And great job, Vernon. Nice work.
Thank you. Thank you. It was good seeing all you that showed up yesterday as well. So we really appreciate it.
And I will turn it back to staff.
Thank you, Kim. Excited to bring folks the next agenda item. It's just diving into our SHS Year 5 work plan. We talked a little bit about this last time. Our work plan, a lot of the metrics in our work plan are driven by the budget process. So just want to appreciate the Solutions Council engagement in those hard conversations around the budget that was embedded into how we are thinking about, of course, our metric outcomes, but also supported how we thought about our qualitative outcome or goals. So what we'll be presenting today is not the metric goals. Those are still with our data teams and programs team doing the math of determining this dollar is here. What does that mean? What does turnover look like in units? So that work is happening now. So we don't have those metric numbers for you yet. We will before next fiscal year. But what we'll be walking through today is the qualitative goals for our system. We have a few kind of key sets of goals we want to discuss. And I'll be turning things over to my colleague Katie Gentry to walk through the goals, and then we'll come back for discussion. So just as a reminder on the process here, we've got our draft work plan that we'll be submitting in April 1st, actually, we'll submit that draft work plan. And then we have a few more months until we have to finalize the work plan to really hone in on those quantitative goals and clarify any qualitative goals that we want to amend, uplift, tweak somehow. So we have quite a bit of time to put this together, but we do have that April 1st timeline right around the corner. So this will be our only conversation before we submit the draft work plan, but we hope to hear any additional comments or conversations if the Solutions Council is interested in having additional conversations on the work plan. All right, with that, I'll turn things over to Katie.
Thanks, Nicole. So gonna briefly walk you through some program outcome metrics. Really diving in straight into shelter, maintaining 385 shelter units. So that includes relocating our pod shelters, which are currently at Aloha and in Cornelius, and finding a new location for those, as well as opening a new Hillsborough shelter. On my very first day, we had a groundbreaking, which is like the best way to start work. And so while we do that, we will also be closing Cloverleaf, and it's kind of a 1-for-1 of moving those shelter beds. As Nicole mentioned, we're still looking at figuring out the goals for all of our housing interventions, but recognizing that we're going to continue to have rapid rehousing and our housing case management services program, as well as our permanent supportive housing units. We are looking at trying to continue to grow our move-in ready, so folks who are ready to move from shelter straight into housing, getting them to be able to quickly move into housing, as well as kind of figuring out what homelessness prevention looks like as we are ramping down eviction prevention from the ARPA era, American Rescue Plan era. And then also looking at how do we keep folks stable and graduating them onto ARLA only, so still having that rental voucher, but less case management needed. So how many folks are we able to kind of continue on that track so that we can open up more spots in case management for new folks coming off the street? Our retention rates, we're keeping at 85%. That's consistent with things we've had in the past, but also looking at how do we continue to keep folks in their housing and stable in their housing, especially as we're moving on through graduation. We also are looking at system goals. So this is something I am really passionate about. We are looking at what does transitional housing look like. We will have some conversation right after this agenda item on the transitional housing programs. We have 2 that we are in the process of designing and looking at for 26-27. So 25-26 will be really looking at how are we designing that? What does program design look like, and what does building design look like? Also ramping up this new program that is a pooled financial resource. So having one location or one pot of money that folks who are connected in the system can get access to this pot of funding to be able to do that quick check. You have everything but that $3,000 for your first month's rent and security deposit saved up. Let's get you out of shelter and into your own place. And really kind of get you moving and not just having you stay in shelter to be able to save up that money. And then lastly, 5 years ago, we went through our local implementation plan for years 1 through 5, but as we're thinking through what do years 6 through 10 look like, really starting to launch that this year and this summer with Nicole and her team, and what does community engagement look like for that, and then also writing that lovely 80-page document that we wrote 5 years ago. What does that look like for the next 5 years? Hopefully shorter. And then also we want to grow partner capacity. So not only does that look like how do we more effectively build Medicaid, especially with the 1115 waiver that's here in Oregon, but also as we think about braided funding and SHS funding being maybe a little bit less, how do we continue to look at other funding sources to leverage the resources in our community? And secondarily, bringing providers along on our financial monitoring and how we are more effectively and more quickly getting money out the door and doing the great work that we're doing. Lastly, Rachel, I see your hand and I will come back, I promise, is equity is the framework of all of the work that we are doing. This has been a goal of ours for the last few years, is understanding that Asian American households in our community, where are they in our community and why is the resource not necessarily getting to them in the way? We are not serving them at the population in our community. And so we are bringing on a Hatfield Fellow to better do quantitative and qualitative data. If you don't know what a Hatfield Fellow is, that was new to me. It's through Portland State. And so they will be working alongside us on really trying to understand that population in our community. And then employing what is known as the RELP tool. This is a tool that has been kind of in the community. Multnomah County and the Joint Office have been kind of deploying that since 2022, but we are now launching a tri-county tool. And so our team was able to do it just this week, but really making it a foundation of all of our level conversations and decision-making kind of as we roll out, especially big decisions. So with that, I'm gonna pause. I see Rachel's hand first, and maybe Martin, if we can go to the next slide. be thinking about these questions before Rachel asks her question of, are these the right goals? Are there other things that we should be prioritizing? And then what recommendations do you all have for making these ambitious but achievable?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm trying to still scope out like how the committee works. It's also strange to be remote when there's so many people there in person. So I wasn't quite sure how to jump in, but thank you. So I just wanted to say, talk for a second about capacity building as it relates to the rollout from HealthShare and the idea of organizations billing Medicaid for housing related or health related service needs, I think is what it stands for, HRSN. And I just want to say I have some concerns about making investments in organizations that don't have a history of billing Medicaid, trying to ramp up to do this. And I just want to make sure, I think it's definitely a great opportunity to make sure that the system is not paying for things that Medicaid should be paying for. But my perspective, and I did do quite a deep dive into this, is that organizations that are already billing Medicaid are the ones who will be the most successful at adding this capacity to the work that they're doing. And that for organizations that are not billing Medicaid, I just think it could go a lot of different ways. So that's just, that's just me sharing my perspective on that. Happy to talk more about it, but that's probably, that's like the most high level I can be.
Rachel, that's awesome. And let's get deeper into that feedback as we go here. I'm gonna briefly respond by saying we hear you and we agree with that feedback. That's why we've set a very low goal of 4. We want to be very mindful, and the goal is that 4 providers who are providing housing services in our system can also learn to bill Medicaid for those housing services. So yes, the right place to start is where we already have providers who are billing Medicaid for probably clinical, behavioral health or other services, but provide housing services and can maybe learn to leverage that system a little bit more through HRSN. And as you know, we often talk about like, well, what about our PSH work and how we can be leveraging? So this is sort of the entry point, and we hope to use this entry point of the waiver as the opportunity to learn how to just get smarter as a system leveraging resources, which does not mean the goal is 100% of providers billing Medicaid. That wouldn't make sense. That's not the goal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just gonna say, I'm glad that you're starting small. That makes a lot of sense to me. I would suggest that there be some interim goals that we're looking at to see how we're doing before we continue to invest money in it. I think even 4 agencies might be a lot of, if you're talking organizations that aren't already billing Medicaid, setting up a system that's going to eventually pay for the new accounting staff required to bill, plus the staff that are actually providing the service, and in the way that Medicaid actually does reimbursement. So I don't know what those threshold goals might be to check along the way, but I would just recommend caution.
Thank you. I hear that feedback more clearly now, and it's like adding in a measurement of evaluating return on investment. So yes, okay, this is maybe a reasonable goal, but let's make sure that it's actually value add as part of that goal. Thank you for that.
Stacy, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I'm just going to weigh in the same way, but maybe with a little bit of a different idea. When we have a goal like that, just an annual for providers, it's not clear that we really want to kind of experiment with certain providers that are ready in a certain kind of way, that have a certain kind of capacity to be able to do this. And so I think just nuancing the message a little bit more so that it's something like, like I don't know, so some kind of, so that providers can raise their hands and then be told like, oh no, you would be great in the second wave. You're not doing anything bad by not doing it in the first wave kind of thing, because there is, you know, a potential for providers to feel like, oh, maybe I have to do this because this is where all the resources are going to be, and I really need to figure out how to get into that. And it will take away from the other services that are being provided just because this is an administrative burden and it isn't actually, you know, providing more services. It can in the future, but at first it won't. It will definitely take away from the services that are available. So I want to make sure there's kind of an even playing field for folks to raise their hands and say like, we want to grow and we want to be part of the system and we want to do this, and be told then, no, could you please not be the person or the organization that experiments on this? I just feel protective of the resources that we have in the system right now.
Vernon had his hand raised. I don't know. If Vernon wants to be
Vernon,
first.
are you on this, are you on the healthcare goal or a different goal?
For me,
Yes.
I just wanted to respond to what or follow up on what Stacy and also Rachel had shared in regarding the so I guess two things. One, does any of the providers have to ask permission or for the to get into Medicaid dollars and that type of revenue? And then also, is this going to be like a pass through where the county SHS will tapping actually to the Medicaid dollars, then distribute them like we're currently doing with all of our other revenue funding, or will this be just specifically between the provider and the Medicaid themselves?
Like, does Adam want to take that question?
I can answer what is happening right now at HealthShare is that there's about $15 million of community capacity building funds that are available for community-based organizations that could qualify as a HR or a health-related social needs provider of some kind. And that could be either the organizational priorities right now are posted on HealthShare's website. There's a variety of them that could really nicely match what we're the capacity building that we're talking about here. Though I think the points are well taken from what Rachel and Stacy had to say about organizational readiness to bill Medicaid. There is a lot that goes into being a Medicaid billing entity, and there's a lot of organizational capacity that needs to be there. But that's partially what that funding is for too, is that from the CCOs, it's looking, there are different opportunities for organizations along different parts of their readiness journeys. I will say this is the last round of community capacity building funding that would be available from the CCOs. There was funding available last year, and then this is the last round that's available this year for the community capacity building funds. And I don't think that's anything new information for some of the folk, like the Washington County folks who are working closely in Medicaid, but for those rest of you, I think it's just good to know that that's posted now, and you can see what that funding or what the organizational, like what the money could be going towards in the community. If you are working for one of those organizations, you're like, we should look at this, or if you're working with some of those organizations saying you should look at this, it's a good time to do.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for that clarity. And all the enthusiasm and question and curiosity and maybe a little healthy skepticism and concern. It might be a really useful conversation to bring back about kind of what is that long-term vision of integrating Medicaid resources into this. Because I think we could keep going, but I want to help return the conversation back to the work plan work at a larger scale.
And before we open up for more questions, just want to respond to Vernon's questions. The question about whether or not providers have to ask for permission, they're welcome to go for, providers in working with their boards can determine what funding streams make sense for them to pursue. It's not, it will not be kind of the county passing through Medicaid dollars. It's really an option for providers to build up that skill set in their own house. And I'll just uplift the comment from Rachel. We know Medicaid billing does not pay for itself. It can be a cost loser for organizations organization. It's not the right word I wanted to use, but you knew what I was where I was going. So just want to appreciate that feedback, and Vernon, to your questions, there's, you know, the county is not gonna tell organizations to not pursue funding.
Thank you.
Yes, Kim?
Thanks. So I just want to highlight, I mean, so part of the messaging that's already been happening is we're going to be asked to do more with less, go after that type of funding. So I know there's some of us who have already started pursuing that because of that messaging. So just putting that out there as well. And I see some head shaking. So just another point of context, giving it back to Katie now.
I'm actually giving it back to Nicole. For facilitating this.
Okay, well, I'll just read the first question as folks ponder and think through it. Are the priority or the goals we presented, are these the right goals to prioritize? Or are there other higher priority goals that are measurable that we should prioritize in year 5? And as folks continue to ponder, I might add just a bit more context. Last year, our current program year 4, we set a lot of goals. We're making our progress in our way through them, but we're realizing in our this now kind of reduction set where we're right sizing our system. We wanted to be more thoughtful about the goals we brought in and have kind of a narrower lens. So there's actually less goals this year than last year, and we're hoping they're meatier goals for us to dive into. But Rachel, I see your hand is up.
Hi, I wanted to just check in a little bit about eviction prevention for people who are currently housed. So I understand that we have fewer dollars moving forward, and that we've been talking about right sizing the services, I think, to match, you know, everything from how much resource we really actually have now, and also what, you know, how to think through community need. And I guess, and it's hard for me looking at these goals to understand, and maybe that's my question, like, what is the role for folks who are in their housing and just need a little bit of money so they don't lose it? And that initially, that when we started doing rapid rehousing, I don't know, that was 15, 20 years ago. This was like the population we were talking about serving. Just folks who needed a little bit of something, and then they were going to keep their housing for quite a while. And I just was curious how that is fitting in. I think that's one of the things that really is, I understand that there was some ARPA money, and obviously we can't fund ongoing costs with one-time only money, but I am just curious about where that sits in these priorities.
I'll maybe start and invite my colleagues to jump in. Rachel, what you're pointing out is a great question. It's not just the ARPA funding that's going away. We know that there's been, you know, increased state funding after the pandemic. So it's hard for our system to adjust to the lower federal funds. And then, as we all know, we've restructured our move-in only costs and our eviction prevention costs to be one program that's currently being designed. And I'll just say point blank, it's not enough, and it's gonna feel like not enough. We are driven to our fidelity to the population A-B split, and eviction prevention is a population B intervention. So that's part of the hard balance we've been taking, but we did want to make sure there were some resources pooled and available and ready. And for that piece, I'll turn to either Katie or Jess to jump in on that.
I think you did an excellent job. This is an example of a program where it's designed in a way that we hope to scale it up when we have resources that can support that. And this is unfortunately a year when we're scaling down. So we fought hard to elbow in the $4 million budget for this program for next year, which is a significant decrease from previous years. But we hope that that's not where that program stays. It's just the reality of what we could manage in a year when we were making this transition in our system to the balanced system that you have all advised us on. And that this is a program that benefits from one-time resources. So in years when we have above revenue from the projection of the revenue, that's going to be a great place to look to invest those resources. And Nicole said it very well, like, it's not going to feel like enough next year. It's going to be really hard. And so, and also we should say this is isn't this on the governor's budget? Like, well, this is an opportunity for all of us to use these concerns and this voice to advocate for more investment at the state level too during the state session.
But
just a recommendation from this table that we really see as a crucial part of the homeless system, especially those recently housed who are more at risk to go back to homelessness if there's not this resource available there. So changing the eligibility, setting the service in a different way, whatever it looks. But eviction prevention is a crucial part of our homeless system and should not be left alone or behind, but included into placement, rapid rehousing, supporting service.
And that is the very sliver of the population that is eligible for the 1115 waiver as well. And I know that it's not perfect yet, but I think I would imagine that some of the hope is that that can pick up some folks from eviction prevention. Again, there's a lot of challenges with the benefit as it right now is, but that is that exact population.
A goal that I'm not seeing, that I also would like to highlight is that landlord should be part also of one of the goals, either an engagement or incentive or knowing the capacity. If we're going to increase our capacity in placement and housing, what is the resource available there? And that is also something that we will want to see. Otherwise, we're going to create goals that will not be ended up into housing because we don't know what's out there. And if we have landlords available to work with us.
I might use this opportunity, Zoe, to mention the Tri-County Planning Body's Landlord Implementation Plan. Metro has been supporting the Tri-Counties and thinking about exactly that, engaging landlords and having consistent messaging. They're working on a website for landlords that describes what the Regional Long-Term Rental Assistance Program is, how it provides access to the risk mitigation fund. Those resources, so we're happy to uplift and share that out, and we're really just want to say publicly grateful for Metro for taking on that heavy lift of what is a regional program, describing it regionally and making sure that we're pooling resources and effectively moving forward with strategies around landlord communication. Pausing on the first question, I'm not seeing any hands online or in person. I'll ask the second question and ask it slowly and give you time to ponder. What recommendations does this committee have for establishing ambitious but achievable goals?
Always looking into the data that we have and make decisions based on that.
As far as the point in time count, when do those numbers come out?
We're working on them right now with our tri-county partners, and we have a regional consultant who's convening all the data. I believe it's generally due to HUD in early April. The HUD schedule's been a little off. Seems to be getting back on track for those of you who are watching or worried. Things, the federal administration has been a little bit off kilter, but we received I'm not going to get into the weeds, but anyway, things look like they might be getting back on track. And so we were hoping sometime in April that will be due to HUD, which will be the deadline we're all working backwards from, which is around the corner. So maybe we're actually probably a whole month out behind that. So anyway, soon. Sorry, Kim.
No, that's okay. It'll just be interesting to see where those numbers come out as we're working with less money. And what if those numbers, do we anticipate them going up from last year?
They have gone up. In ways in which we've seen significant expansion of our shelter, which means we have more people in our shelter beds, which is contributing to a higher homeless count, right? Because we're able to count those folks.
Yeah.
But we also have seen some increase in unsheltered count. Data is still unfinished. And we'll have lots to learn about the why behind that. I think some of that why has to do with a larger system in place to be able to interact with and catch and count people. But also it's an indication the need is still very real in the
Yeah.
community.
If I could add to that, Jess, I think we're still seeing factors that would, economic factors that lead to increased homelessness. While we've seen a steadying of rent prices, incomes have not gone up to match those. And certainly inflation is hitting households incredibly hard. It's hard to keep up with inflation right now.
Kim's got her hand raised.
Literally. Couple questions on the goals. You guys state that the housing intervention goals are under development. When do you think you'll have those, and will we see those before this is finalized?
We will absolutely share them with you. As Nicole mentioned, it's a draft that we have due on April 1st. And to Zoe's point, we are crunching the data to understand what feel like reasonable and yet ambitious goals, achievable, but ambitious but achievable goals. So data-backed goals based on attrition and capacity and timelines for expected placements and things. Because we don't want to overpromise what our system can't commit, but we also want to make commitments that are worthy of a system of our size and scale. So Kim, to your question, no, the data is due April 1st. We will share it with you, what the staff are recommending in those programs so that you see the draft. And then we can definitely bring it back for further discussion and kind of talk through the data that led to those draft numbers before we submit them as final. We're also going to want to wait for final numbers. We expect we'll have to adjust because the data will change, right? We will meet, where we end up in year 4 with our goals will inform the capacity for year 5, if you will. So we're going to have to adjust some of those goals based on the outcomes from year 4. And that's why we're going to use this extra period of time to refine the draft before it is a final work plan.
Okay, thank you. And then next question is about the bottom one. What are current retention rates at PSH and Rapid Rehousing? Is 85 even achievable?
I can jump in on that, and maybe I'll rapidly pull it up. We look at retention rates, Kim, just at the end of the year, looking at the previous 2-year cycle. And they were for both of them above 85%. I believe PSH was at 90% and Rapid Rehousing was at 86%, but I'll double check. And I'll also say, I think the wonky housers in the room know that that's a fairly good metric when compared nationally, and just want to uplift that nationally. Retention rates are typically around 75%. So this is true across the metro region that our system is doing a good job of helping folks retain their housing.
We're fully supportive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll also add, I think statewide, they set a goal of 80%, which they did exceed, but their housing retention rate was not at the 90% that we see here in Washington.
Great. Thank you. Katie, did you have more, or were those questions kind of the end of our?
That is it for this agenda item, Ms. Chair.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments about this topic? Great. Seeing none, staff, if you're ready, we can move on to the transitional housing.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, maybe I'll just quickly close out to say, we talked through this already, but we are working on submitting this draft on April 1st. We have the final due 60 days after our budget is approved. So it's not a clear metric, but we're hoping to finalize it really in early January as the internal metric we're tracking. So more to come on this. I hear an interest to bring this back, and we'll work with your chair and co-chair to get that slotted in a future meeting.
Oh, can I add one more question or comment?
Yes.
This is part of my work life, so forgive me if it's inappropriate, but you're talking a lot about data. And one of the things that we're trying to work on with folks from Washington County Homeless Services is to really establish a data sharing agreement or in relationship with HealthShare and Washington County to really better understand the overlap between health impacts for housing insecure folks and being able to really share large scale data back and forth and how we would do that. And I think I don't know if that fits on this plan, but if we're thinking about things that could make an impact on really evaluating like where certain interventions could be located or which providers are serving really high risk individuals. This is something that I think could go a long way to do that. And it is not labor or it's not cost intensive, but it's labor intensive to get the work done. And so if we're looking at like things that could make a difference that we want to add to a plan that might have some impact, I don't want to miss a chance to talk about it. And so I would add that to potentially here.
Yeah, and I'll add, Adam, I think it's great for this time, but I'm hearing you more so for how do we leverage that in the update to our local implementation plan, which we'll be bringing to this group in the summer.
Okay.
Great. Rachel, see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit on clarification about that. I know, just being my age and sitting through other systems and meetings in the past, sharing data, having housing and health aid care agencies share data has been kind of a long-term goal. I think since 2014, when the Affordable Care Act was passed. And so it would be awesome to have some of that. It'd be great to start small. I sometimes wonder if we don't get things done because we start really with wanting everything at once. There's also been a lot of data already produced on this issue, information funded by Enterprise Foundation that actually showed the impact of healthcare and on housing, the impact on housing for people who are housing insecure on their healthcare costs, as well as showing the impact, the costs of for folks who were just, really highly had a lot of healthcare needs and were homeless, and then they got healthcare, and then what that at least saved, at least for the first 2 years, what that saved Medicaid. So I just also want to point out that there's a lot of data out there. I don't know that we're using it or looking at it.
Thank you, Rachel. Staff, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that initial feedback. We're excited to bring back elements of the work plan for next year and continue to hone our system through your guidance. And speaking of honing our system, we spent some time talking about transitional housing here when we were working on that balance system. We were consulting you all on as we were anticipating programmatic reductions, and now knowing that we are working in a constrained resource reality, how do we right size the types of housing programs in our system to meet our community need? And what you all consistently came back in affirming was the need for a transitional housing to help meet help provide higher levels of care for folks who aren't thriving or stabilizing in our shelter programs, and for folks who may find a bridge too far to get to stability in permanent supportive housing, or try permanent supportive housing, but it doesn't work and we don't want to go back to the streets, right? So we really spent a lot of time talking about transitional housing. Thank you for that, for helping champion that vision and supporting us as the team built out the NOFO. Actually, I think that's part of, I sometimes do this. I talk about my talking points when the PowerPoint has been built to walk us through the talking points. So let's move through the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Okay. So with that guidance, we built out the transitional housing NOFO and launched it in July of last year, and it was awarded, wait, was it released in September 2024? Wow, time. Okay, yes, there it is. It was released in the fall and then awarded in December. So your guidance helped envision what would go into that NOFO. And we really honed in on 2 different priority populations or priority service needs, I might describe it as, so that we could focus on transitional housing where for folks with substance use challenges who needed those additional recovery supports to find stability. And that through that transitional housing support might be able to graduate to employment and independent housing, or might just be able to get back on their feet and move back into that PSH building that they were living in, right? So recovery focused, clean and sober, supportive housing or transitional housing. And then the other type of transitional housing that was lifted up and prioritized was recovery, stabilization, which transitional housing, which is really meant to focus on people with behavioral health needs and supports, and really putting those enriched wraparound services on site, clinical services on site with that transitional housing program. So through that process, I don't want to belabor the point because many of you were here through all of it, but some of you have been new to our work. So transitional housing will be a new component to our system. Thank you for that guidance, and thanks to this wonderful NOFO that many of the staff around the table helped make possible. And the board then, through this rigorous review process and several applications that were received, we approved 2 separate projects, and they are there. The Cornell Road recovery program that was proposed by Central City Concern to acquire and rehabilitate a hotel, and then Transcending Hope's stabilization proposal for to acquire land and develop a new building for 39 households in a behavioral health focused transitional housing program. So both of these were awarded in December and are progressing, and we're coming to you with some updates about that progress. I think the next slide will illustrate the timelines for these projects. So the one in the middle is the Cornell Road one. You see that in the lighter brown color. And the one on the bottom is the Transcending Hope. But essentially what you're seeing is we're getting started right now, starting to prepare conversations with the community engagement, the neighbor notification, which leads to more of a longer community engagement process later. That is just about to begin. And soon there will be shovels in the ground and construction happening at the Transcending Hope site and rehabilitation happening on the Cornell Road site. And then through that community engagement process, a good neighbor agreement in partnership with the providers. And then the sites are anticipated to open in next summer and late 2026, it looks like, for the 2 projects. So we're in about a 15 to 18 month phase. Is that right, Jesse? Mm-hmm. For planning these programs, which is a really great place to be. I mean, those months will go really fast. I know Jessica and Jesse who are leading that work, and they're going to take you into some of the early program design questions we have. The work will go really fast because many of the decisions are based on one another. Like, how will this program be designed? We'll have to, we'll determine like how many units you need with kitchenettes or something like that. So the questions are starting to come in the doors as these programs just begin. But one important point of progress and change along the way, I think, is the next slide. Central City Concern, who was awarded the hotel acquisition project for the recovery housing, the clean and sober recovery housing on Cornell Road, they approached the county after the award and let us know that they needed to make a change order request. Due to some capacity challenges in the organization, their board was no longer confident moving forward as owner of the property. They wanted to continue to support the project. They believe in the vision. They believe in the partners behind it. They believe in bringing recovery, transitional housing to Washington County. And they could not execute the purchase and sale agreement. So they approached our housing authority and asked our housing authority if they would be willing to step into that role. To be clear and transparent, the Department of Housing Services includes the housing authority, right? We're in this table here of staff is the Homeless Services Division, and our housing authority often acts as a developer and owner of affordable housing in addition to the rent assistance services that we provide. So the Housing Authority approached their board, the Housing Authority Board of Directors, with this consideration and agreed that the acquisition under the Housing Authority was in mission alignment with the role and responsibilities of the Housing Authority and was in alignment with the initial vision of the project and the award. So that process moved forward, and the purchase and sale agreement was transferred to the Housing Authority. And I think it was just Monday or last Monday that the purchase and sale closed. So the Housing Authority now owns the hotel and is working with Central City Concern on the rehabilitation process and the program design process. And because the Housing Authority now owns the hotel, and Central City Concern is more in a consultant and supporter role of the project, the Housing Authority has this opportunity to look at the original design and ask some new questions about what it means to own and in the future operate this transitional housing project. And so Jesse and Jessica are supporting that program development, the project management of the program development, so that we can prepare to bring on the future recovery services that will be offered in this transitional housing program. So I know that this is a question that came up, I think, at our last Solutions Council meeting. I believe it was you, Vernon, who raised the question, and we were not at the time at liberty to share all of this information because of some executive privileged information our board was handling. So I wanted to come forth and provide all that information transparently and clearly for you all. And I don't want to delay the important program design questions that Jesse and Jessica have prepared for you all, but I do want to make sure that we answer any questions you might have about that change order request and these two really exciting transitional housing projects that are going to bring on, it's 119 units of transitional housing for us in about 15 to 18 months. So exciting work, but happy to take any questions or pass the baton and keep the conversation going. Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I assume that by assuming ownership of the facility, you also assume maintenance, the maintenance cost, leaving Central City Concern to be the service providers for the services,
That's the.
which sounds like they should be billed to Medicaid.
Ah.
Thus freeing up some of the money that we had to put it back into rapid rehousing, and I feel guilty that we took away all that.
Well, I'm really glad you bring up, I think it's actually maybe on Jesse's slide here, but Medicaid was always envisioned to be a braided resource into this transitional housing project. And that's one of the beauties of transitional housing, because it pairs housing services with clinical services. So we can be bringing those Medicaid funded clinical services to bear in site or on site. And that will be a part of the project, no matter who are the service providers. But now that the acquisition has been secured, some of the questions you've asked are exactly the next step about the roles of the providers. And there are many different kinds of operations that need to be managed on an ongoing basis. Property management operations, program operations of, enrolling people, keeping the participants
So
safe.
why did they open a new NOFO?
Sorry, just a second, Kim. Good question.
Sorry,
and then
I
also
didn't
the
realize
clinical
I wasn't,
services.
I
So
actually was. It's my bad. I didn't realize I was unmuted. I'm just talking out loud.
Good thing that's all you said. All good, Kim, no problem. But it's a good question, and it's where frankly, we're not yet there, but that is a very good possibility. It wouldn't probably be a NOFO, but a request for proposals to bring together the provider team. We're still in conversation with the original applicants, Central City Concern, which included Northwest Institute of Northwest and CODA, to understand their ability to move forward with the original services plan. And once those conversations have clarity, we'll bring that information back to you. Jim, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. It looks like Vernon has a question.
Yes, I guess my question is, since Central City Concern sort of pivoted and this is a capital project, then why are they going to receive the exact same amounts that they were awarded to basically act as a consultant? Or I'm just if you can give me some clarification around that piece, because that's a
Sure.
little confusing to me.
That's an excellent question. The project has been awarded up to that total amount based on the actual project costs. But the recipient of the resources for the acquisition is now the housing authority. So in fact, the Homeless Services Division executed a contract with the housing authority so that the housing authority could purchase the property and for the anticipated rehabilitation costs. Then the housing authority will execute or has executed a contract with Central City Concern as the development consultant. So it's a part of the entire original project award, but the flow of funds by way of the contracts is slightly different because of the housing authority being the owner.
And just
Yeah,
if I could
it's-
add, I think a helpful piece of context, something that for those of us in the homeless services space aren't always tracking. Typically when the housing authority is developing something, they always have a development consultant. So this is part of their normal practice to have that support and consultation as they're moving forward and developing a project.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all. Happy to answer any, I know this is like really weedy, so Kim's like, why are we talking about this? It's really weedy. We're gonna get to the
These
good.
kind of services are exciting for me because this does impact us. So
Okay.
this is good stuff.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's get into the good stuff. I'll pass the time to Jesse and Jesse.
I'm gonna introduce Jessica really quick, but I'm Jessie Adams. I work in homeless services, and I am the leader of our strategic projects team. So I get to do really, really cool stuff like work with Vernon on opening his incredible resource center, Kim on her amazing access center, and the other big stuff we've gotten to build these past several years. And on this project, it is going to be a really exciting, really huge lift. And one of our partners is HHS. They have helped us with the acquisition costs of the building and are going to lend us their subject matter expertise in how to best design the programming that's going to take place on site there. So I'm going to hand over the next couple of slides to Jessica Cashman from HHS, and then come back in at the end to kind of talk about next steps, because this is going to be a really long process that will involve us coming back to you guys several times about program and design of this building.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. As Jessie mentioned, I'm Jessica Cashman. I'm from the Health and Human Services Department, the Behavioral Health Division. I'm with Special Projects for them, and I have about 20 years of experience within the behavioral health field. I am a licensed therapist as well, so don't hold that against me. So I do come with a wealth of knowledge on how, programs work and how we can best serve our community. So I just want to thank everybody for having me here today, and I'm really looking forward to the feedback that we can get regarding these programs and these projects. It's been really fantastic to work with Jessie and Jess and the whole housing team. So what we're looking at really with this Cornell Road program is, since CCC has sort of taken a step back, we're looking at, okay, what can we do with this design and how can we best serve the community? So we have some thoughts we'd love to get your feedback on. So first and foremost is creating a mix of recovery-focused transitional housing programs to reduce those needs in our community at one location. And to remember that this hotel has about 80 to 90 units. So it's a larger hotel. And so really we're wondering, do we want to keep this as just recovery focused, substance use recovery? Do we want to mix in some other programs that could also work together, such as the LAP program, and I'm now totally forgetting what the acronym stands for.
Low acuity treatment services.
Thank you. So integrating, that program into this, possibly also integrating some mental health programming as well. The setup for the hotel is really fantastic. It has 4 floors and really lends itself to either the entirety of the hotel for one program or being able to be split up with different programs as needed, what we really feel like this community needs. Covered the last, I'm with you, Jess. I'm like, I just started talking and I'm like, did I catch all those points? So yes, thank you. So really we're considering, what programs, and then that lends to what sort of units then do we need to have for these programs? So really I'm going to kick it back to Jesse. Was there anything else? Sorry, I just kept rolling with it.
No, yeah, thanks. So we're here to talk through these discussion questions with you all today. Really because as Jess mentioned, these questions are gonna start coming fast and furious and they're all gonna kind of feed on each other. So like what kind of programming do we wanna have at the site? How can it all work together? What kind of spaces do those programs need? Do they need care rooms? Do they need bigger conference rooms? Do they need maybe recovery, peer support manager units that are slightly bigger? So really, we're here to kind of talk through all of that stuff and get your subject matter expertise on really what can we do? This is a really cool opportunity. There are 99 rooms total. I think we're looking for 80 to 90 of the rooms to be used for programming. So yeah, y'all, let's dream big. What would you do if this was your building? Let's hear about it.
Rachel's got her hand raised.
Of course I do. Sorry. So one of the really big gaps in the system, from my perspective anyway, is that place that's almost like assisted living for people who are in recovery. And that's not really transitional, but if it has, so I'm not sure, I guess one question I have is, does this all have to be transitional, or can some of it be less transitional or maybe more recuperative? I guess if it's transitional, but there is my experience has just been that a lot of times in permanent supportive housing, we end up housing people who really have more needs than can be housed in permanent supportive housing. And one of the reasons that happens is because there's nowhere else for people to go. And so we end up doing all kinds of things to try to help people be successful in housing. And it's just people really need more care. And sometimes people really need to not be in a permanent housing program. They need something where there's a little bit more a few more rules, so that maybe you can help ensure that they're not going to get evicted for hoarding, or people are, I don't know, there's just all kinds of things. So this is exciting. I don't know if anyone here remembers the Taft Hotel that was in downtown Portland that kind of folded, but that was an amazing, even though the building was crap, it filled a really important niche. And I just am curious if there's anything that we can accomplish with this building that is similar to that. Thank you.
That is excellent feedback, and I'm just going to answer a technical question, which is to say that the resources are limited to transitional housing because of Metro guidance on capital resources at this time from SHS. So that is why we're very specifically looking, and that's defined as up to 1 to 2 or up to 2 years of program enrollment. But there's flexibility there within, Rachel, to achieve much of what you're describing.
I think one of the things that got tossed around to kind of talk about that was something that was mentioned on what some of the other sides about transitioning in place. So maybe someone comes out of a rehab facility into a recovery-based shorter term program and then transitions into a longer term sober living program that's also on site. So we really do have a lot of wiggle room to address some of those issues. So like I said, yeah, really any ideas you got, let's hear them, let's put it all.
I think that's helpful to have people modeling recovery for new people coming in the beginning stages of recovery. So you can kind of see the entire circle and the pre-contemplative state of change. And then I think with having on-site people living there, I think managing crisis and risk is also incredibly helpful. We have house managers that live on site, and then we have on-site case managers in our programs, and it's a lot easier to have staff that are there at nighttime, rather than having to have staff who are at home show up for something that could have been navigated in 15-20 minutes.
Stacey's got her hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to add something that I probably will just add every single time now is we need to recognize that we're dealing with an older population. So accessibility, let's make sure we make the recovery services and the, you know, the other one, the less acute, that one, able to serve folks who are older and who might have different kinds of disabilities. So we just need to start doing that because demographic changes here, and we need to keep the older adult model and the more disabled population in mind. That's it.
Thank you, Stacy. One of the things we were so excited about with this physical structure of the hotel is it actually has kind of like 2 ground floors that are both accessible. It has a wheelchair and it's accessible beyond that, but because of it's built into a hall or a hill, it actually has 2 different entrance points that would make 2 floors fully accessible.
How do we see people coming into this project? Where are they coming from?
So we really envision, well, if you want to talk about this, she can talk about.
Yes. Yeah, so it's super exciting. I'm also working on the CAT project, which you may have heard about, which is it's going to be a recovery center in Hillsborough and one in Beaverton, which brings together a lot of different service providers that are offering services for substance abuse, for sobering, for detox. So one of our thinking was, especially the Beaverton location has sobering, detox, and once they are complete with that program, it's going to be a really short-term program. Then they can transition hopefully over to something like this hotel.
And this hotel is 5 minutes away from where that CAT building will be.
Yeah, thank you.
But the population will still be homeless and chronic.
Yes.
Yeah, since we're using SHS dollars, it's still fit
Right.
that definition. So yeah, we envision a really kind of a warm handoff situation with folks who are having trouble maybe maintaining in shelters who are exploring their sobriety, and as our
Right.
shelters are low barrier spaces, that's
It's
really
like
tough
the
for a lot of
entrance from
folks.
that and entrance from all of our already established,
Exactly, yeah, so we really envision kind of a warm circle between like shelters, the CAT, the transitional housing, where people really want to work on there.
And then from PSH too, if they're having to relocate from PSH and they weren't able to stabilize through that, that's also a
right?
access point.
Yeah, I was thinking that 10% of that 90 retentions that we have.
Mhm.
We'll talk 10%.
And is CODA an essential part of this program?
Actually, CODA is at the Beaverton location and they are the service provider there. So they are definitely an integral part of this. We're hoping to continue that partnership with them depending on how this structure ends up working out. But they will definitely, hopefully be a partner.
Hi, 2 quick things. Also, Jim, just for your information, at the CAT are housing liaisons. So all of those mental health detox, and then also connections to housing. And then I think Project Homeless Connect is probably going to have clients that are currently housed that are going to need this resource because they're not going to be successful in housing. So I'm excited about this transitional housing. I think it's a huge benefit for the friends that we get to serve, and it's going to have a really positive impact. So great work, you guys.
We've talked a little bit about programming itself. Any design considerations that you haven't heard mentioned? We talked a little bit about accessibility. Anything else that you feel like needs to be on site? We talked some about like resident manager units that might be a little bit bigger. Anything else on the first question up there that we want to elevate?
Cultural appropriate service.
Who is the architect?
So we are in this room, Jessica and I are partnering together on the programmatic stuff. Lisa Barron is leading the development of this building, and they are currently working on a design build offering. And I'm not quite sure when that will be launched. I believe their goal is early summer, but the short answer is we don't know yet.
I see Cameron Murphy has her hand raised, but we passed the public comment section, so sorry, Cameron.
I would imagine part of the goal will be to have people be able to access services on site, and therefore, I mean, a certain amount of treatment specific rooms would be needed. And I'm a huge believer in peer support services and having a big part of this, and so I think like the clubhouse model for peer supports is a huge, could be a really cool opportunity to build like a clubhouse, like an in-house clubhouse support.
Awesome. Yeah, another thing about this hotel is it does have a lot of really big like ballrooms and a really big pool area. We'll love the pool piece of something. But a lot of really, really flexible space, and as Jess mentioned, that is pretty accessible space as well. So.
While folks ponder this question, I might uplift the February Lived Experience Advisory Committee that met to talk about transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. So just to say, we did get some very specific design feedback and ideas from that group. So when we're moving forward, we'll be sure in our design elements to point out where we got the feedback from. A lot of really great feedback came from that group. And I'll maybe say Chelsea or Hannah, if there's anything you'd like to uplift, I'll invite you in.
One interesting thing that I heard a lot from the lived experience group was the importance of having gender specific floors at least, and that co-ed spaces, especially for recovery spaces, they did not have good experiences with. So that was something that really stuck out to me.
And then Jesse, I mean, could we throw a gym in there? Moving your body. I mean, it's, recovery is hard, and having a space to work it out, or just a dance room. We could have fun with it too.
The ballroom.
Actual ballroom. Then I'm not sure, actually, I've done a poor job of checking the clock. I don't know how much time I have left. So other programs that would be suitable for co-location here, we talked a lot about recovery. The other program that was kind of elevated was LATS. Of course, there's the consideration, right, that people are working on their sobriety and recovery here and making sure that the populations are suitable to do that together. But anything else you feel like should be elevated to be considered there?
I heard recuperative care from Rachel.
I think the ability to serve a dually diagnosed population that have substance use disorders as well as behavioral health concerns is going to be could be a really great resource to have for these folks. And often the two programs, as much as they should, don't really play well together. And it would be the ability to do both, I think, would be really fantastic.
It's also helpful to think about like how we want the transitional housing to be ready and able to receive folks who might not be succeeding in permanent supportive housing. You might also think about the behavioral health stabilization transitional housing and the recovery transitional housing kind of having a similar relationship. If someone needs a sober setting or someone is not succeeding in a sober setting, like making the relationships between those programs. And
Adam, do you have any like specifics on behavioral health treatment that could be on site?
I mean, there are a lot of different providers out there who could do this type of work. And with I know part of the goal would be sustainability. In order to bill Medicaid, they would need to have an intake assessment and be able to then have a treatment plan written for them, and that would allow for billable services to be provided on site. And most of our major community-based organizations or community-based mental health providers are really skilled at that and know how to do that work. And so that's my really long answer of saying, yes, there are ways to do it.
And Stacey, I see your hand.
Yeah, and equally depending on the treatment plan and the phase that the person is in, career coaching can be a part of this as well. So you could have employment services available on site to do some career coaching as to stabilize, since this is going to be transitional.
Yeah, okay. So I think for us, one of the things we do is we try to build space for people to come and offer the services, get right. So we're not expecting like SEPA, when we have, like, we're not gonna provide all the services ourselves. We're gonna hope that partners come in to do it. And so a lot of times we talk to our partners about like, well, what do you know, if we were to build you an office, what would you need in that office? You know, if someone was to come and do employment support, would you need to have a place where there were computers available for people to, you know, look for jobs or whatever. So I think it's partly about reaching out to partners about what they need once the program is figured out. And so having some flexible space so that people can have a place to work, and also remembering that you want it to be safe, so that it's designed with safety in mind, also for the staff who are working there, which means that offices should ideally have 2 doors and things like that. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff based on program when you get further along, I think. You know, cameras, trauma informed, but also you want cameras, so.
That's a beautiful segue into the last one. So anything else we want to address safety wise? If there's, it is a bigger site, 80 to 90 is a lot of folks in one spot. Anything about, yeah, safety wise numbers, making sure we touched on, you know, having recovery managers or on-site managers all the time, cameras, as Rachel mentioned, anything else on safety?
Nice. And if you're talking, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So this reminds me a lot of like the Family Peace Center, since we're almost at the finish line with the FPC. But one of the risks that we always talk about with serving the public is like panic buttons in case you're in a situation where you don't know how to get out of that situation, or there's someone that's unavailable, or they're hard to get a hold of. Just having like a team of folks who are ready to respond to any situation. So just a panic button.
Okay, thank you, Jesse and Jessica, for your time and energy on all of that. We look forward to hearing more about all the progress in getting this program online. It's going to be great. Our last agenda, I think, is some staff updates. So Nicole?
Oh, no. We missed one.
Do you want to talk through the next steps quickly, Jesse, or?
Oh, yeah, sorry, really quick. I mean, we touched on this a little bit already. We are gonna come back to y'all as the programming gets shored up with you know, number of beds and what types of programming, and if there's gonna be an RFP and all of that stuff. We'll also come back as the design kicks off, because obviously there have been several things elevated here. That's a crucial input from not only whoever is going to be the service provider, but other folks as well. Co-locating services and their needs, all of that stuff. So we're going to try to decide on the programming types that are going to be at the building in early April, and then move right on into designing the design build contract and all of that. So it's going to be quick. A year sounds like, or 15 months sounds like a long time, and it is. So I'll see you again soon.
Next week. All right, thank you, Jesse, and we'll go through the staff updates quick and aim to get us out of here right on time. Carly's not able to join us today for the legislative update, so I'll provide just some brief updates. The biggest one being we're starting to see stuff move. The budget conversations are starting, which is really exciting, because that's where the biggest, and hopefully folks online are hearing me through the train. That is where the biggest opportunity for impact is. So I've been chatting with your chair and co-chair, and we'll be working on a letter of support for both Oregon Housing and Community Services budget and what is in the governor's recommended budget. So that includes resources to continue sheltering, for the long-term rental assistance from the state, as well as affordable housing preservation and development dollars. So we'll be submitting letters of support on the Solutions Council behalf. Kim and Drew will edit that letter next week, and then we'll submit it next week. Our Chair Harrington will likely be submitting a letter of support to show the county's overall support for housing resources as a priority of their legislative agenda. And then BNF is working with the Housing Advisory Committee to also submit a letter of support. So more to come on that, but we will see OHCS's budget presented next week with a public hearing anticipated for March 26th. So that's the date we're working towards. Also on the legislative front, we're seeing policy items move forward. There was an important package related to what happens when affordable housing has its affordability restrictions expire. So some affordable housing preservation pieces move forward, including increased notification for tenants, vouchers for tenants if they need support, if their home is no longer affordable to them, as well as, of course, really important resources to preserve and purchase affordable housing to help it maintain its affordability. So a lot of packages are moving forward. There's a few key dates to be aware of. Tomorrow actually is the deadline for policy bills to have a work session posted in their first committee. So this is kind of one of those key days when a lot of bills lose their ability to move forward for the session. So we'll see a narrowing of the landscape of legislation. I know this group has been incredibly interested in time, place, manner policies. It's been a lot in the news about that recently. Washington County is happy with the current time, place, manner policy. We're not looking to see a state legislative change, but are watching it closely and following that conversation. There's a few different bills, one in the Senate, one in the House, and we'll see if they get scheduled by Friday. But it's likely that the legislature is happy with what they did. They're hearing a lot of feedback from local governments that is, we're good. This is working for us, and they're hearing feedback from local governments that are saying we would like more control over how camping occurs. We're thinking that the former will win the argument, but of course we're watching closely and we'll report back. The other dates to be aware of, we've got the budget sessions, and then really work kind of slows down until the legislature knows the amount of resources they have. So we'll anticipate kind of more budget movement happening in the spring with after OH or the Oregon Housing and Community Services budget. The next big piece of information will be when the legislature considers what to do with their bond money. And their bond money is used to develop new affordable housing and to preserve affordable housing. So we'll be engaged in those conversations as well, and be looking to work with Kim and Drew, or your chair and co-chair, to submit more testimony in support of those investments. We're feeling good about where the legislature is. We're hearing good feedback, and we're really grateful, in particular for Governor Kotek and how much she put housing front and center in her budget. It puts us in a really good place to get those resources our community needs. So more to come on that, but I'll leave it there for now, and we'll go to other staff updates. Thank you, Kim, for shouting out Just Compassion's opening this week. That was just an incredible event, really exciting to be there. We're glad to have the governor and Congresswoman Salinas in the room, as well as our Chair Harrington, Metro Council President Peterson, Mayor Lube from Tiger. There's a lot of support and excitement, and Vernon, just huge congratulations to you and your staff for all of the work that's gone in to getting ready to open doors and welcome new guests. We're really excited to see that come to fruition. And then you see on the screen here, we also celebrated, as Katie referenced, the opening or the groundbreaking for the Hillsborough shelter. A quick update on that. We will be putting out a request for proposals to identify providers, aiming to get that out April 1st. So we'll have our provider selected hopefully soon and begin community engagement there. The slides went away. I don't know.
I'm sorry, I can't do it and give the right information.
No worries, you're all right. Before we turn it over to Chelsea to give just the update on the volunteer appreciation, one other piece of information to uplift, our Housing Advisory Council, BNF wasn't able to make it today. She had to step out early. She shared her updates with me. Their meeting is next Thursday. They'll be talking about housing types and learning more about that in preparation for the advisory committee of the Housing Authority to hear about their work with the partnership with Central City Concern and that hotel. So they'll be hearing a little bit about that as well. And we'll also be getting a legislative update from their particular lobbyist. The Housing Authority is a member of the Housing Authority of Oregon, and they have a presence in Salem. So Ryan Fisher is their lobbyist, and we'll be giving a legislative update as well at the Housing Alliance, or excuse me, the Housing Advisory Committee, ooh, words.
Nicole,
Yes.
there was also homeless services funding updates on the agenda.
Thank you. I will jump to that now. I'll start by saying we've been long talking about the potential SHS measure. I said to a group of staff earlier today, if it goes in November, it seems 20% likely that there'll be some measure in November. And we keep having a bit of a ping ponging. Will there be a measure? Will there not be a measure? I think we're landing on probably not for November. We'll continue to bring updates, but Metro President Peterson's work group is meeting regularly. They're talking about a North Star for the SHS program. The conversation is going a little slowly, and I think folks are recognizing that there needs to be time for additional conversation to land on key performance indicators and other SHS reform ideas gets before it's something can move to the ballot. So we're hoping that we're excited to see that conversation and glad to see the reflection in that space. And then the other update I'd provide, we've talked about the uncertainty of COC funds. Continuum of care funds are a small part of our budget, but they're part of our budget that we have to account for. We're starting to hear of COC grants kind of coming unlocked from the system. We're also hearing some becoming relocked and then unlocked again. So it's looking positive. We are seeing other kind of HUD reports becoming unlocked and moving forward. You'll hear next month about the system performance measures. That is something that we've been waiting for a few months. So good to see that come undone and a sign that the normal work is moving forward. The last homeless funding update I mentioned as part of the legislative update, we're feeling good about the governor's requested budget and the investments in homelessness there. I'll also reference what your public comment referenced in the Tri-County Planning Body meeting. We did secure approval to use $9 million of Regional Investment Fund carryover for the transition fund. As you will recall, we've dedicated $7 million of our unencumbered carryover to that fund and are slated to support that with stabilization reserves if more is needed. So we're excited to get that moving forward. There's more work and details that we need to work out with Metro and the body itself, but we're feeling great about the level of support from the Tri-County Planning Body, and Zoe is a member of that body as well, and they were very supportive of the ask that we brought forward and appreciative of the change in strategy to really shore up our regional system of care.
All right. Okay, and very lastly, you are all invited to the annual volunteer appreciation celebration. It's going to be Thursday, April 24th at 5:30 p.m. There will be food. Just want to make that really clear. It's at 5:30 p.m. and they'll also have entertainment, gift basket raffles. I definitely think you all should take them up on that offer and join. That's it.
Okay.
Great.
Share any final?
Anything else for the good of the order? Yes, Rachel.
We're Planbeck Gardens is opening. We're having our grand opening on April 3rd. If folks are interested and they haven't gotten an invitation, let me know. I'd be happy to get. But it is April 3rd between 2 and 4. We have 116 apartments there that will be. We have 116 apartments there. 16 of them are supportive housing, partnering with Community Action and other fabulous partners. So really, really excited. This is our pandemic baby.
Congratulations, Rachel.
Thank you everyone for being here. We will see you next month.
Thanks.
Thank
all.
you. Chair.